Imagine, for a moment, the kind of mind that can seamlessly navigate between the worlds of neuroscience, systems theory, philosophy, and Buddhist meditation, all while staying deeply rooted in the rigor of scientific inquiry. Now picture that same mind not just dipping a toe into these vast, often conflicting domains but instead building bridges, weaving them together into a cohesive understanding of the mind, life, and consciousness. That was Francisco J. Varela, a Chilean-born scientist, philosopher, and contemplative practitioner whose groundbreaking work continues to resonate across multiple fields, even decades after his death in 2001. Varela's life journey was nothing short of extraordinary. Marked by a relentless intellectual curiosity that pushed him far beyond the boundaries of conventional academic disciplines. Born in Santiago, Chile, in 1946, he was captivated from a young age by the mysteries of life and mind. His path took him from Harvard University, where he earned his PhD, to his collaborations with some of the greatest thinkers of his time, and eventually, to his deep engagement with Buddhist philosophy and meditative practice. Varela's work was revolutionary because it went beyond the traditional confines of science and philosophy, merging Western cognitive science with Eastern contemplative traditions in a way that still challenges and inspires researchers today. In this deep dive into Varela's life and work, we'll explore not just the theories he developed, like autopoiesis and enactive cognition, but also the philosophical dialogues he helped foster between Western science and Buddhist thought. His journey wasn't just about academic achievements, it was about fundamentally changing how we understand ourselves, our minds, and our relationship with the world. Early life and the seeds of curiosity. To understand the depth of Francisco Varela's contributions, we must first look at his early life. Born into a post-war Chile, Varela grew up in a world undergoing rapid change. From a young age, he showed an interest in biology, a field that would lay the foundation for his later inquiries into life's most fundamental processes. But it wasn't just the mechanics of life that intrigued him. Varela was also deeply interested in the philosophical questions surrounding existence. These dual interests, science and philosophy, would follow him throughout his life, shaping the innovative, interdisciplinary nature of his work. Varela's early education took place in Santiago, where he studied biology at the University of Chile. It was here that he began to question the existing paradigms in biology, especially the dominant reductionist approach that sought to explain life solely through the lens of chemistry and physics. Varela wasn't satisfied with these answers. He sensed that something was missing, that life couldn't be fully understood by breaking it down into its smallest components. This dissatisfaction led him to seek out new frameworks for understanding living systems, ones that could account for the complexity and autonomy of life. His thirst for deeper understanding eventually led him to Harvard University, where he earned his PhD in biology under the mentorship of prominent biologists. But even as he delved deeper into the study of living systems, Varela was also growing increasingly fascinated by questions of cognition and consciousness. What, he wondered, was the connection between life and mind? How could the biological processes of a living organism give rise to thought, awareness, and conscious experience? The theory of autopoiesis, life as self-creation. It was during his time at Harvard that Varela began to formulate his first major contribution to science, the theory of autopoiesis, which he developed in collaboration with his fellow Chilean biologist Umberto Maturana. The term autopoiesis, derived from the Greek for self-making, refers to the idea that living systems are autonomous entities that maintain themselves through continuous self-production. Unlike machines, which operate according to external instructions, living systems generate and sustain themselves from within. This concept was a radical departure from traditional views of biology, which tended to see living organisms as passive entities reacting to their environments. The theory of autopoiesis, first articulated in the 1970s, fundamentally challenged the reductionist view of life. According to Varela and Maturana, living organisms are not just collections of parts, they are dynamic, self-organizing systems that actively produce the conditions of their own existence. Autopoiesis suggests that life is not something that happens to an organism, rather, life is something that an organism creates for itself. This idea of self-creation became the cornerstone of Varela's later work in cognitive science and philosophy, but let's take a moment to really appreciate the implications of this theory. Autopoiesis doesn't just apply to single-celled organisms or biological systems, it has profound implications for how we understand human cognition, society, and even culture. If life itself is a process of self-making, then so too are the structures of mind and society. Everything from our individual thoughts to the institutions we create can be seen as autopoietic systems, constantly generating and regenerating themselves. Isn't that a mind-blowing way to think about the world? The beauty of autopoiesis is that it offers a framework for understanding life that is both biological and philosophical. It challenges us to rethink what it means to be alive, not just in the biological sense but in the cognitive and existential sense as well. Varela's work in this area was groundbreaking, and it set the stage for his later explorations of cognition and consciousness. Enactive cognition, a new paradigm for understanding the mind, building on the concept of autopoiesis, Varela developed one of his most influential ideas, enactive cognition. This theory, which emerged in the 1980s and 1990s, was a direct challenge to the traditional, Cartesian view of the mind. For centuries, Western philosophy had treated the mind as a kind of disembodied entity, separate from the body and the world. According to this view, cognition was something that happened inside the brain, a kind of computational process that operated independently of the body's movements and interactions with the environment. Varela saw things very differently. He believed that cognition was not just a mental process but something that involved the whole body and its interactions with the world. This was the essence of enactive cognition, the idea that the mind emerges from the dynamic interplay between an organism and its environment. Rather than being a passive receiver of external stimuli, the mind actively participates in creating its own reality. Think about that for a moment. Your mind is not just something inside your head, it's something that emerges from your embodied actions, your movements, and your engagements with the world around you. This idea was revolutionary because it challenged the long-standing separation between mind and body. Varela argued that the two are inseparable. Cognition is an embodied process, and the body is as much a part of thinking as the brain is. This perspective had profound implications for the study of the mind. For one thing, it meant that cognitive science could no longer rely solely on abstract models of the brain, it had to take into account the whole organism and its environment. This led to a new wave of research in embodied cognition, which continues to shape the field today. But there was another, even deeper implication of enactive cognition. It suggested that reality itself is something that we actively create through our interactions with the world. In other words, the mind doesn't just represent the world, it helps to bring the world into being. This idea is reminiscent of Buddhist philosophy, which teaches that the mind plays a central role in shaping our experience of reality. It's no wonder, then, that Varela's later work would bring these two traditions, Western cognitive science and Buddhist philosophy, into a rich dialogue. The Embodied Mind, a landmark work in cognitive science. In 1991, Varela, along with philosopher Evan Thompson and psychologist Eleanor Rosch, co-authored the landmark book, The Embodied Mind, Cognitive Science and Human Experience. This book became a foundational text for the emerging field of embodied cognition and helped to popularize the ideas of enactive cognition and mind as action. What made The Embodied Mind so revolutionary was its emphasis on the interconnectedness of the mind, body, and world. The authors argued that cognition is not something that happens in isolation, it is a relational process that emerges from the interaction between an organism and its environment. This was a radical departure from the dominant cognitive models of the time, which tended to view the mind as a kind of information processor, detached from the body and the world. The Embodied Mind also introduced the concept of mind as action, which suggests that the mind is not a passive recipient of external stimuli but an active participant in shaping its own reality. This idea, drawn from both phenomenology and Buddhist philosophy, challenged the traditional dualism between subject and object. According to Varela and his co-authors, there is no clear separation between the mind and the world. the two are constantly co-creating each other through ongoing interactions. This concept of mind as action was deeply influenced by Varela's Buddhist practice, particularly the idea that the mind is inseparable from the body and its activities. For Varela, the insights gained from Buddhist meditation offered a powerful way to understand the nature of consciousness and experience, insights that could complement and even enhance the findings of cognitive science. The influence of Buddhist philosophy on Varela's work. Perhaps one of the most unique aspects of Varela's intellectual journey was his deep engagement with Buddhist philosophy, particularly the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. Varela's interest in Buddhism began in the 1970s when he started practicing meditation under the guidance of Tibetan lamas and scholars. This wasn't just a casual interest. Buddhist contemplative practices became a central part of Varela's life and work, influencing his scientific theories as well as his personal philosophy. One of the key principles of Buddhist thought that resonated with Varela was the idea of interdependence, the notion that all phenomena arise in dependence upon other phenomena. This idea is closely related to Varela's theory of enactive cognition, which posits that cognition emerges from the dynamic interaction between an organism and its environment. In both Buddhism and enactive cognition, there is no clear separation between the self and the world. They are intertwined, co-creating each other in every moment. Varela was also deeply influenced by the Buddhist understanding of the mind, particularly the idea that the mind is not a fixed entity but a fluid, dynamic process. In Buddhist meditation, practitioners are encouraged to observe the mind's activity without attachment, recognizing that thoughts, emotions, and sensations are constantly arising and passing away. This understanding of the mind as a process rather than a thing resonated with Varela's scientific work, particularly his theory of autopoiesis, which also emphasizes the processual nature of life and mind, the mind and life dialogues, bridging Western science and Buddhist philosophy. One of Varela's most significant contributions to both science and philosophy was his role in establishing the mind and life dialogues, a series of discussions between Western scientists and Buddhist scholars, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama. These dialogues, which began in the late 1980s, were designed to foster a cross-cultural exchange of ideas about the nature of the mind, consciousness, and reality. Varela played a key role in shaping these dialogues, which brought together some of the world's leading neuroscientists, psychologists, physicists, and Buddhist scholars to explore the intersection between Western science and Eastern contemplative practices. The goal of the mind and life dialogues was to create a mutually enriching conversation between these two traditions, with the hope that each could inform and enhance the other's understanding of the mind. One of the central themes of the dialogues was the potential for personal transformation through meditation. Varela and the Dalai Lama shared a mutual belief that understanding the human mind required insights from both first-person experience, meditation, and third-person observation, scientific methods. Varela introduced the idea that the meditative mind, one that is aware, focused, and contemplative, could be studied scientifically, and that Buddhist practices such as mindfulness and compassion could be systematically explored to gain insights into their effects on brain function and mental well-being. The mind and life dialogues were groundbreaking in many ways. They marked one of the first serious efforts to bring Buddhist mindfulness and meditation practices into dialogue with cognitive science, with the goal of understanding how subjective experience and consciousness arise. These dialogues laid the groundwork for what would later become a thriving field of research into contemplative neuroscience, the study of how meditative practices can influence the brain and mind, neurophenomenology, bridging subjective experience and objective science. One of Varela's most innovative contributions to cognitive science was his development of neurophenomenology, a method that sought to integrate subjective reports from meditation with objective data from neuroscience. Neurophenomenology was Varela's attempt to bridge the gap between the first-person experience of consciousness and the third-person observation of brain activity. Varela argued that meditation could provide a disciplined method for observing mental processes, much like how a scientist might observe physical phenomena. By combining the insights gained from meditative practice with the tools of neuroscience, Varela believed that we could gain a deeper understanding of the nature of consciousness and the workings of the mind. at the heart of neurophenomenology was the idea that subjective experience is an essential part of understanding the mind. Varela rejected the traditional reductionist approach of cognitive science, which often sought to explain consciousness purely in terms of neural activity. Instead, he argued that consciousness could only be fully understood by taking into account both the subjective experience of the individual and the objective measurements of brain activity. Neurophenomenology was a bold and innovative approach, one that sought to bridge the inner experience of consciousness with the external observation of brain function. This concept continues to influence research in both neuroscience and contemplative studies today, as scientists increasingly recognize the importance of integrating first-person and third-person perspectives in the study of the mind. Varela's legacy, a holistic vision of life, mind, and consciousness. Francisco Varela's intellectual legacy is vast and multifaceted. His work has had a profound impact on fields as diverse as biology, cognitive science, philosophy, and Buddhist studies. But perhaps his most lasting contribution is the holistic vision of life, mind, and consciousness that he helped to create, a vision that continues to inspire researchers and thinkers across disciplines. Varela's theories of autopoiesis and enactive cognition challenged the dominant reductionist models of life and mind, offering a more integrative and dynamic understanding of how living systems and cognitive processes work. His concept of the embodied mind shifted the field of cognitive science away from a purely computational view of the brain and toward a more holistic approach that includes the body and the environment in the process of thinking and perceiving. Varela's influence also extends to the growing field of contemplative science, which studies the effects of meditative practices on the brain and mind. His work with the Dalai Lama and the Mind and Life Institute helped to legitimize the study of mindfulness and compassion as valuable practices for both mental health and cognitive enhancement. Today, research continues to validate the benefits of mindfulness, compassion, and other meditative practices for improving emotional regulation, attention, and overall well-being. Varela's philosophical contributions, particularly his efforts to integrate Buddhist thought with Western philosophy, have also been highly influential. His work bridged the gap between phenomenology and Buddhist philosophy, showing how both traditions offer complementary insights into the nature of consciousness and the self. His concept of neurophenomenology continues to shape research that seeks to integrate subjective experience with objective scientific inquiry, offering a new way of understanding the mind that honors both inner experience and external observation. Conclusion: a visionary mind and an enduring legacy, Francisco Varela's life and work were revolutionary in many ways. By combining the rigor of scientific inquiry with the introspective depth of Buddhist meditation, Varela created a new paradigm for studying the mind, one that continues to resonate with researchers, practitioners, and philosophers today. His vision of a holistic understanding of consciousness, one that includes the body, mind, and environment, remains a powerful legacy in both the scientific and contemplative communities. Varela's work teaches us that to truly understand the mind, we must look at it from every angle, through the lenses of science, philosophy, and personal experience. In the end, Francisco Varela was not just a scientist or a philosopher, he was a visionary, someone who dared to question conventional wisdom and to explore uncharted territories of thought. His life and work remind us of the power of interdisciplinary thinking, of curiosity, and of the profound insights that can arise when we bring together diverse perspectives in the quest to understand the most fundamental mysteries of life and mind.